It is my privilege to introduce our guest speaker for the evening. Just a few days, over 22 years ago, Addison was born into our family in 1990. And those of you who've had kids, especially your first kid, you're wondering, what do we do with this kid? How's this going to work out? And you have so many prayers that you're saying. I've told this story before, but I'll tell it again. Kim woke me up in the middle of the night crying before we had Addison. But she was pregnant with Addison, and she was like, what do I do with the kid all day? I'm like, I don't know. I'm going to work. You'll be glad to know that Addison graduated at the top of his high school class of one. He graduated from Keele Academy. That was because he was homeschooled every step of his high school, every step of his kid school years. Did take him to public school a couple of times, threatened him, said, don't make me take you back there. No, it was great because we have partnership with Rhodes Elementary School. And in those early days, I would volunteer in the classrooms, and I got to take Addison and even Haley as well. I got to take them into the grades that they were in so they could see the public school. But it was I give all the credit to my wife because she homeschooled our kids the whole way. And knowing that, you send your kids off to college and you're not sure exactly how that's going to work out since they've not really been in a classroom before. And I've been very, very proud of him in his schooling. Addison is a missions major at Harding University. He has a desire to serve full-time in the mission field. And Brandon and Katie, you guys know exactly what that's like. To have that desire and that burning inside you to want to be able to share God's word with people who might not be able to hear it unless somebody over here helps somebody go over there and tell that message. So that's an excitement for me, and I am very, very proud of him. As well as I think, and I hope that you guys are, because obviously we've spent our entire time of Addison's life here. And so when I think of his home, obviously I think of, our house. But I also think of Broken Arrow in this church family because this church family does an amazing job of raising our kids. And I know it's a struggle, and I know parents need help, and I know all that, and I've been very appreciative of it. And so I want to basically introduce and give to you someone that you know by heart already because he grew up here. Addison, look forward to hearing from you.
Good evening. It's quite fitting, actually, that my dad get to introduce me, and I think it's special for you to be able to introduce your child as well, but it's also a coincidence because this is going to tie directly into my sermon for you tonight, my mission plan. Another thing before we begin is that this is my first time using an actual PowerPoint presentation. So I've never actually been able to hold one of these clickers in my hand before. That's cool. Another thing to note on this topic is that I'm using a software that was kind of shown to me 2 weeks ago. And as I was watching this software in class at Harding, I noticed some of my friends started to complain, wow, this kind of makes me dizzy. And so I really tried hard to not make this something that's going to be disorienting to you, but this PowerPoint presentation moves, and I'm excited about that, actually. I'm a visual person myself, and it really helps me to see things where they relate to and everything like that. So I hope a few of you, I hope many of you will be We'll feel like this enhances your experience of my sermon. I hope this helps just kind of concrete everything together for you. That's the purpose of this. Another thing before we begin is that I really struggled with how to organize all my thoughts. I know a lot of you have experienced this before, but when you become really passionate about something, it's really hard to kind of just focus in and be direct and to the point when you should be. You kind of just start to, this and that and this and the other, and you just start talking. And next thing you know, you've just kind of like just been talking, and you haven't really gotten anywhere. So I struggle with how to organize this, but the way I've organized it is trying to lead you through where I have been. I want you, as much as I can, to be able to see the way I see, to see things and appreciate them how I've appreciated them, and to really get a feel for why this is my passion. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and start with the question, 10 years from now, what is that going to look like? Especially in Ukraine, with my mission field that I've selected. The first thing we're going to go ahead and start with is some of my background and what's been important to me in my growing up. The first thing is obviously Burnt Cabin Church Camp. This has had a huge impact in my life, but mostly I believe it was my second to last year becoming a senior. I don't know if you know this, Dad, but you said something to me that really sparked my interest. I remember it very distinctly. I was coming down into the chapel assembly area, and everyone had been dismissed to go and get in line for food. But, you know, for me, I'd never get in line because it's too long of a line, and I'll just get in line with everybody else. I'll get my food. I'll just get it later. So I usually just talk. And so I found my dad, and I started talking, and he asked me this question that has still burned in my mind. And that question is, what have you been up to? What are you doing? And normally that wouldn't have been something that was very moving, but for me, that really struck me because what he was asking me was, what have you been doing that makes a difference? And I thought to myself, and I really couldn't answer, what have I been doing? Because what I had been doing was playing with my friends. I've been having a good time. I've been making sure my own spirituality was good, getting that charge from camp, but I hadn't really been doing much outside of that, and I really realized that this is what it needs to be. So, what have I been doing, and what do I need to be doing? Church camp played a huge part of my life. Another thing that happened to me was an experience that I had kind of in just thinking to myself, and it actually happened on the way to my piano lesson. I was driving to piano class, and I was listening to a song on the radio, and the chorus goes, "I don't want to gain the whole world and lose my soul." And I started to think to myself, you know, I'm going to piano practice, and if I become the most famous piano player ever in all of history, that'd be cool, and I'd enjoy it. But then when you're dead, who can enjoy it? And I began to really experience and feel that, you know what, it doesn't really matter what you accomplish in this life, what you accomplish right now. What happens if you are the wealthiest person on the face of this planet? What happens then? What happens when you die? Where does it go? So much for the wealth that you've accumulated. And I really began to feel that life was more than this. What is life about then? How do you make a difference? And I realized that what made a difference for me was I wanted to hear the Father tell me, "You've done a good job." I wanted to make God, my Father, proud of me. This experience led me to really consider what I wanted to do with my life, and I figured that the biggest thing that I could do was to help someone get to heaven who wouldn't have been there without me. Now, my friend Evan Maynard was going on a mission trip to Ukraine, and my dad's been going to Ukraine for quite a long time, and both of them kind of tag-teamed me to get me to go to the mission field. And up until that point, I had never really felt like I wanted to actually commit to this. I felt like, no, that's not for me. That's not what I should be doing. You know, that's for other people who are way more outgoing than I am. But I eventually, because of the experiences that I had before, I decided, you know, I should go. And I did. I feel like I wanted more in this life, and I decided to give missions a shot. During this first mission trip that I did, I had the opportunity to meet this kid at an orphanage. And this story is probably one of the biggest reasons why this has become my passion. And the story is this. we hold a VBS event for different churches in different areas. And this one we did in Shakhtorsk and for an orphanage. And at this orphanage, the kids have the ability to come, but since we're in their area and they really don't have any other place to go, they don't have to come if they don't want to. Well, there was this one kid who was coming, and he was about my age at the time, about 17 years old, and his attitude was, I am way too cool for school. And I know we know what that feels like, and he would literally come by our classroom blaring rap music from his cell phone and give us the look like, yeah, I don't have to be there. I can choose what I want to do. The second day he came by, and he kind of started to, listen through the door and started kind of just listening to the translation that was going on. The third day he sat in class. The third day he sat with us, and he kind of asked questions that were sort of, they seemed to be like a stump the teacher kind of question. Well, what about this? What about that? But then midway through the day, he left again. And thanks to the power of God, the fourth day, he stayed the entire time. Luke Walford was with me. He would not quit asking Luke and I to play any sort of sport that he could think of. He wanted to learn American football. He wanted to play ping pong. He wanted to do anything and everything just to be with us. And it's at that time when I think, what could have happened if we had more time than just 4 days? You have 4 days, that's barely enough to get to know someone. That's not enough to really be able to impact someone's life, help change them. But I wonder what would have happened if this person had more time. What if he was the next Paul the Apostle? What if he would have been responsible for so many people to come to Christ through him? And I just wonder, and frankly, I don't think I'll ever know. But that story has stuck with me this entire time. This is my background, and this is what has helped to shape me and help me to motivate me to be a full-time a missionary. Because of all this, I feel convicted to go. A little background on Ukraine. Now, you've gotten some background from Brandon, and I'm thankful for that, so I don't feel like I have to show you exactly where Ukraine is on the map. However, I do want to kind of point out some other stuff that Ukraine has been going through. There are two things that have really that Ukraine struggles with, and that's religion and the effects of communism. Now, with communism, communism has helped to build a lack of leadership in Ukraine, and this shows up everywhere, not just in the church. This shows up everywhere. It has also tried to, communism has also tried to remove religion itself from society as a whole. With leadership, leadership in Ukraine's history has proven to oppress people. This has made people very, very, very skeptic of leaders in general. Ukraine is used to being a people that is under someone's authority, and this authority does not have their well-being looked after. They're used to this kind of thing, and that's unfortunate. Another one of my classes at Harding, we had to read a book, and it was called Merging of the Waters, and it was about blending old traditional missionary techniques with more modern missionary techniques. And they had a whole chapter devoted to the effect of memory of a nation's past on a country today. And I have a quote here from the author, Fritz Kling, and this is directly about Ukraine. This is about their capital, Kiev. Living in a city that has burned down 4 different times, citizens are more resilient than trusting. This is a byproduct of communism and the fact that this country has had to look out for itself. The people have had to look out for itself. They haven't really been able to trust their government to do that. People as a whole distrust authority. Another thing is that the family structure is not near as strong as it's used to be. And I think you got a glimpse of this when Brandon was speaking to you. The family structure is very much deteriorating in Ukraine. Back in the communism era, about 70% of pregnancies ended in abortion. Another statistic puts it this way: the average Soviet woman had 30 to 40 abortions in her lifetime. Okay, 30 to 40 abortions in her lifetime. And then what I want to know is who's skewing the results? Because, I mean, if some people get 4 abortions, who's having more than that? Okay, the family lifestyle is deteriorating. And the way that affects Ukraine is Ukraine's kids are looking for a place to belong. Ukraine's kids don't have a family, even like some of us do, knowing that some of us do come from broken families. Ukrainians as a whole, on the average, do not even have that. Many kids in the orphanage, many kids with one parent or no parents living on the street. Another thing that goes on that you need to know about Ukraine is that there is a lot of corruption in the government as it is now. This means that for the average family, the man of the household needs to either work more than necessary or to participate in corruption in order to have a decent amount of income. It's another background piece of Ukraine. Now, about religion, I found this part a little bit disturbing. But because communism tried to stamp out religion as a whole, and they tried to get it to be viewed in a negative light, what you have here is a percentage. The one on the left is a pie chart of religion as a whole in Ukraine. And what I want you to notice is that the comma needs to be a period, but this was published by a Russian research team, and they flipped those. However, 62.5% of people claim to be non-religious. 62.5% of the population of Ukraine claim to be non-religious. Now, the pie chart on the right is a pie chart of the people who are religious. So out of all the people who are religious, let me go ahead and put this up. As of 2006, 62.5 people claim to be non-religious. As a whole, of all the religious people, Protestants, all Protestantism in general, makes up nearly 3%. 3% of the religious people in general. This leaves Protestantism as a whole in Ukraine at hovering just about the 1% mark. That's in stark contrast to the United States. It stands in stark contrast. And I want you to combine the fact that they are lacking in religiousness as a whole and the fact that they're lacking in their family structure as a whole. And I want you to start seeing where this is going. Kids are desperately needing help. There's your 2.4%. As a whole, Ukraine views Christianity as a crutch. You have to be a weak person to need Christianity. And in fact, when someone says, "Oh, you're a Christian," one of the first things that's going to go through their mind is, "Well, what's wrong with you? You're a Christian? Well, what do you need help with?" And that's sadly the way religion as a whole is viewed in Ukraine. Now, I want to present to you a model. I got to talk with my professor about evangelism in Ukraine, in Europe as a whole. There was a professor who was a missionary in the Czech Republic for 10, 12 years. He started a church. This church began to grow, was upwards of 30, 40 members. And when it came time for him to phase out, the missionary phased out, but the church started to dwindle again. And the church started to decline and decline and decline until there was a few families left. And just recently, they officially dissolved. Now, I want you to contrast that with the church by another missionary that was started in Slovakia, among the Slovak people. This missionary decided to focus on kids. And while he wouldn't exclude adults, his ministry really, really focused on kids. He focused on the kids. He taught them to value Christ. He taught them to love Christ with all their being. These kids grew up. These kids got married. These kids had kids. And they taught their kids to love God, and they taught their kids to be faithful. Both of these churches did well. Both of these churches had upwards to 30, 40 members. However, it's the church in Slovakia that is still strong and has even grown since then. I believe, I have it right here. This is because when the kids who learned Christianity got married, they had kids, and they taught their kids. This isn't quite something that you might get when you teach older people. What forms your life is your childhood. Okay, now switch gears for a little bit. And I want you to kind of imagine something to yourself. I want you to imagine that you're back in your childhood. Back in your childhood, somewhere in grade school. I want you to remember who your friends were. Go ahead and do that. Who were your friends? Who did you play with? Who did you go to church with? Who like impacted your life? What was the high times of your life? What were the low times of your life? What were they centered around? What as a child were you really geared toward? And what was like that dominating thought in your head? Okay. Now I want you to remember being a teenager. Okay. Has anything changed? Has your outlook on life changed? Has the people you hang around changed? Have you, as a whole, been involved in the church? Were your friends involved with the church? But what about now? Where are the people that you surrounded yourself right now? Those friends in high school, those friends in grade school, are they still spiritually where they were before? Do they still go to church? Are they still involved? I want you to consider how their lifestyle is different than yours right now. Meaning, are they happy? Are they not doing so well? Are they in trouble? Are they not? How are they doing? How are you doing? And I want you to see that a lot of us have friends and family who have been in the same church with you. They've been in the same youth group as you, but they didn't turn out as you did. So the question is, why does this happen? How can two people go to the same church, the same youth group, and then in college one stays faithful, and then the other one in college gets into a lot of terrible stuff and eventually just leaves the church? How does that work? A key is that a person will stay faithful if they value Christ. The more you value Christ in your own life, the more likely you are to care about what Jesus thinks about what you're doing. The more likely Christ is the center of you, the more likely you will stay the center of Christ. So another question, how do you learn to value Christ? I think when you remembered where you were in your childhood, you might remember what your family did for you, what your friends did for you, all these experiences that led up to who you were. Who is going to teach these kids in this culture where religion is repressed, where the family is breaking apart? Who is going to teach these kids? Who's going to teach these kids to love God, to value God, to stick with it when it gets hard? Their parents? Their school? Their friends? How are they supposed to know God? How are they supposed to not just know God, but value Him if they don't learn from someone who values God Himself? I don't think they get that from their parents. I don't think they get that from their school. I don't think they get that from their friends. Because the Ukrainian society has made the Christianity a crutch, kids feel they don't belong there. You don't want to feel like you need a crutch. Kids do not believe if they feel they don't belong. Church family, where do the sick people belong? In a hospital. Where do the spiritually sick people belong? In the hands of the church. Starting to get carried away again. Kids do not feel they belong because of the way society treats church. It's a crutch. It's not what you need to survive. You're tougher than that. And yet, this is what they need. They need, and they're searching for somewhere to belong. And they don't get that. Again, the stereotypical view of church is that it's boring, it's dull, it's not for them, and so they don't go. And even when they do go, they won't stay for very long because there's such a view that church is not for you because it's a crutch. Let me try to give you an example. When the Broken Arrow Church goes to Ukraine, puts on these VBS, tons of kids come. We will have 70, 80, 90, 100 kids coming to this camp. And the number grows as they are able to grow. The number doesn't shrink, it grows. 70 kids will come. Then 80 kids will come. The next thing you know, you're trying to juggle 100 kids around, trying to figure out what to do with them. And that's a blessing. And they come because they feel they belong. They come because this is where they feel love. They come because this is where they get their needs met. When Broken Arrow stops, and when Broken Arrow has to leave and go home, the kids stop coming. I have gotten the chance to stay in Ukraine after the team has left, and we'll still have 40 kids coming the week after the VBS is done. But then that number is going to drop down to 10, and then it drops down to 5. And we need someone there to help make church something for the kids. We need to give them a place where they can be connected. We need to give them a place where they feel they belong. This is the whole part of me wanting to be a missionary. The kids now are the future church. They become the future core of the church. If you do not start with your kids, the church the church is not as strong later. The kids are where we need to be focused. The kids need to feel they belong. The kids need to be more involved. Helping kids to feel like they belong and that they are part of this church is accomplished in a lot of ways. And what you're going to see is that the Broken Arrow Church of Christ does a lot of these. Things like Timothy class, things like service projects, and things like participating in worship. All things that kids can do to be involved in church, to feel like they belong. Every day, kids hear a message from the world, a world view of how the world wants them to be. But there's near no message from a Christian view. So much of your life is formed while you're a kid. So much of your childhood determines who you are, and we don't spend near enough time with our kids. We don't spend near enough time giving these kids a belief, giving them teachings of Christ, making them love and value Christ. As Christians, we are not called to convince everyone. That's not our job. Our job isn't to go over to everybody's house and knock on their door and ask them point blank, are you a Christian? And if not, we don't have to sit there and hammer into their heads, you have to be a Christian. Our job is to share good news. Our job is to share Christ with people who will listen. That's our job. And our job is to do that with kids too. In my as a missionary, what I really want to focus on is the lack of leadership in men. And that's part of it. But also to focus on building up a place where the youth can feel like they belong and where they can feel connected to church. We have that here in BA. I know a lot of people who have become Christians because their friend invited them. And unfortunately, this is not a scenario, this is not something that people would do in Ukraine because, again, they don't feel like they belong. Why would you invite your friend to something that you don't even feel like you belong in? I want all of this to change. I want this to be something where you can invite your friends. And you guys are not only going to have a good time, but you guys are going to be more centered on Christ. Both of these ideas help to build a Christian community. This community is going to be able to teach its kids and have a balanced church as a whole. What I want you to leave you guys with is the idea that 10 years from now, I want to be a missionary in Ukraine. And I want me being a missionary in Ukraine to have affected the Ukrainian culture, the areas where these churches are, enough to where people and kids feel like they belong in church. They feel like they are connected with church. I want them to feel that God paid a price for them and that God cares dearly about them. I believe that's what it's all about. Because 10 years from then, these kids are going to be the men and women of the church. They're going to be the ones who are teaching people. They're going to be the ones who are going out and telling people. I want to thank you for your time. Again, I wish I had things better organized and really could show you the way I feel about it. But I thank you for your time. I thank you for your attention. And prayers for Ukraine would be appreciated. Prayers from you would be appreciated as well. Thank you very much.